Hello, it's me. And today, it's a little bit of a bizarre video that I'm gonna make because there are three concepts I would like to explain. And all three of these concepts I came up with. So, it's gonna be a little bit difficult because these are not concepts anybody has ever heard of. But basically, the three concepts are the Jester, the Dark Enlightenment, and the Autisticene. Now, the second one, the Dark Enlightenment, is actually a concept that already exists. But I actually stole that concept and decided to turn it into my own concept because I decided it has a better use. So what I'm going to do, I don't know if it's gonna work or not, but I'm gonna explain those three concepts. They are basically political concepts. So the Jester, well, even the Jester already exists, but again, I modified the idea. The Autistecene, I hope you can kind of recognize, is a reference to the different kind of geological epochs there are. And currently we're supposed to be living in something called the Anthropocene, the age of humanity. Well, I think we live in the age of autism. And so, these three concepts are basically highly related to each other, because I made them up, and they all have to do with autism. And because jesters are actually, well, basically, when I first came up with the idea of the Jester, it was because of a video I watched that connected autism to jesters. And some people in the comments came around and said that, hey, I'm autistic and I've always had an affinity for jesters, so I'm also autistic. And so I believe that autism is a great theoretical model to use to understand reality, modern society. And so it also came out of the novel by the novelist Osamu Dazai called No Longer Human, where this guy really felt alienated from everybody else, and so he would mask, right? That's an actual technical word, I think. The autistic person masks as if he was not autistic, and so he referred to that as playing a jester. And so those were the inspirations for me to develop this idea of the Jester. And at first it was kind of idealistic for me. The idea was the Jester is this great truth-sayer, like the court jester. His job was to tell the truth about the kingdom without repercussions. So the king couldn't actually execute him because that was his job, to make fun of him. And so I thought, well, that's a great tool to really understand, to be ethical, right? Because what we need in intellectuals and philosophers is a truth-sayer, somebody who's willing to tell the truth, no matter how nasty or uncomfortable it is. But the Jester has an advantage over your regular intellectual, which is that he can actually say all that stuff and get away with it. And so I realized that this is actually basically a political strategy. And so I connected it pretty quickly to George Carlin, right? Everybody, I take it, knows George Carlin. But basically he was a comedian, and he's usually referred to as a philosopher comedian, right? A great kind of intellectual. And so I realized that George Carlin was a great jester because he could actually tell the truth by masking it with humor. So here again, the idea of masking is of great importance. The jester actually is masking the truth that he was to say by burying it in humor. And so I realized that that's actually a great strategy, political strategy. And so because it's a political strategy, there's nothing fundamentally moral about it. Nothing fundamentally moral about being a jester. And that's what I realized when I realized that Donald Trump, you know, the big D, the orange man, was himself a jester. Why? Because everybody knows that Donald Trump is basically a clown. Even his supporters know that he's kind of an idiot, and he will say outrageous things, and he will make jokes, and he's funny. And this was especially true about 10 years ago, the run-up to the 2016 elections. That's when Donald Trump was really at his highest moments, when, you know, he came up with basically no political background and eviscerated the Republican ticket, completely eviscerated them. And how? Well, he eviscerated them with humor. And that's the key. Nobody took Donald Trump serious. Everybody said he was not gonna win, he was not gonna win. You know, but he did actually win, right? But why? Because, not because he told the truth per se, he obviously lied a lot. But the point is that he used humor. He used the fact that he looks ridiculous with his stupid orange hair. Kind of, you know, not yellowish hair. He looks ridiculous, he sounds ridiculous, he does all this shit. He stands weird. And so consciously or not, Donald Trump actually became a fucking jester. That is to say, he used humor and not being taken seriously as a weapon. So because people didn't take him seriously, he actually exploded and won the elections. This was in fact impossible for him to do if he was taken seriously, or he would have been, because he would have been boring. He would have not been interesting at all. So, you know, it was in fact a requirement for him to be ridiculous. And so, ooh, dear God. Yeah, and so I realized that it was actually a strategy for him that did in fact work. And so my idea of the jester it is basically a new idea, I think, is the idea that you will exploit the fact that people don't take you seriously in order to eviscerate the system. So another aspect of the jester is that he doesn't actually build. That's my idea, is that the jester is not a constructive force. If you think back to medieval jesters, they didn't build anything. They just simply made fun. They jested, that's the point. So a jester has to stay true to his character as a troll. And so if you apply this idea to George Carlin again, George Carlin didn't make anything. He didn't build a house. He didn't run for office. He was just a wrecking machine. He exposed the system and awoke a lot of people to the idea that society is basically a giant piece of shit, filled with lies, and, you know, you have no chance. You know, it's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. It's a big club, and you and I ain't in it. Parents are full of shit. Teachers are full of shit. Religion is definitely full of shit. You know, it's called the Ten Commandments, because the number 10 is a psychologically satisfying. So, you know, he really just jested. But he actually had a darker sentiment. If you read between the lines, you will see that he actually says some really disturbing shit. Like, one thing he said is that there is no such thing as an innocent victim, because nobody in the world is innocent. Everybody is guilty of being part of this exploitative system of civilization and humanity and evolution. So, you know, he was a giant doomer. And I think the Jester is basically a doomer, a cynic. He's somebody who doesn't really believe that the world can be saved. So George Carlin explicitly denied the idea that the world could be saved. When he talked about saving the planet, he said we can't even save ourselves, let alone the fucking planet. We can't even take care of each other. So we're not gonna save the planet. And you don't have to agree with this. I think there's a lot of cynicism. It's not perfect as an idea, because it does give you the excuse to not do anything. But it's really hard to disagree with. So, you know, George Carlin kind of pretended as if he was nihilistic, but he actually cared a lot. But that's incidental to the Jester, is my argument. The Jester doesn't need to be a good person, doesn't need to care. And so if you apply this doomerism to Trump, you find that he was actually quite the Jester, because he never actually believed that, let's say, climate change could be fixed, right? His idea has always been, you know, well, the climate is changing, and, you know, the Democrats want to take away your money, and, you know, he you know, and he actually wrecked the system. He completely blew the lid of the system, whereas it used to be a dishonest system, but a system that had a kind of elegance. You know, everybody spoke politely to each other, and what Donald Trump did was completely shit all over that, and so he became obscene and a doomer, right? It doesn't look that way because he pretends to be Christian. Everybody knows he isn't. He doesn't care. But on the inside, he has really always been a jester. He has really always been the sort of person who was extremely cynical, exploited Christianity for his own gain, exploited the Bible. You know, he sold Donald Trump Bibles, you know, MAGA Bibles. He built a university. He rock-pulled people with his own cryptocurrency. He obviously doesn't believe anything. And so I would consider him a kind of an evil jester. But he is a jester nonetheless. Why? Because first, remember, he uses humor, consciously or not, I don't know, but he uses humor to rise. Okay, so you can't possibly win because he's a clown, right? I think it was Jeb Bush who told him, you know, Donald, you can't insult your way to the presidency, you know, and it turned out he was wrong. So all the moralistic protestations of Republicans, of the Republican nominees, didn't knock him off, because, you know, he was playing into the character of a jester. Don't take me seriously. But the crowd took him seriously. So the jester doesn't take himself seriously, in that he is a clown, and he probably knows that he's being a clown. But the way the jester actually wins, the way he rises to the top, is by the fact that he has an audience that nonetheless takes him seriously. So his audience very much took him seriously because they elected him president. Even though they knew he was a clown, they knew he was basically a jester. They probably knew he was a liar, and, you know, he was a sleazy businessman all his life, who bankrupted a fucking casino which is pretty incredible. The fact that he was a reality show star. They basically knew he was full of shit. But it didn't matter, because he was honest about being full of shit. He didn't put on a show of, I'm the most moral guy imaginable. You know, he didn't browbeat people with morals. But if you look at his enemies, his foes, they would constantly try to attack him by attacking his reputation and saying, don't vote for Donald Trump because he's a disgusting pig. He's a misogynist. He's a foul-mouthed, you know. Don't vote for him. Hillary did this. Jeb Bush did this, the rest of them. But the people liked him better because he was honest about his bullshit. Even though he was full of shit, even though he was a clown and basically an actor, it didn't really matter. Because he was authentic in his own bullshit. He played into it. He didn't give a shit. He didn't apologize on purpose. He didn't say, I'm sorry, I saw the light, I came to God. None of it. It was always me, me, me. It was always narcissism. But it was funny. It was personable. It was relatable. So he pulled the great trick that of being a billionaire but being a populist. The sort of billionaire people can relate to because he was so obscene. And his enemies, his opponents, never could really figure that out. They never could figure out that people actually like the obscenity. And so that's the full picture of the Jester as a political strategy. And it's the same reason that George Carlin is so popular. I mean, just think about it. George Carlin said some of the most darkest, most disgusting shit you can imagine. He openly talked about how he enjoyed seeing a lot of people die. So much so that he recorded a special one day before 9/11 when he was talking about, you know, what if you blow up a plane? What if, you know, he was talking about violence openly one day before 9/11, and they actually had to cancel the special, and it only came out like years later. So the guy was extremely insensitive, in a way kind of cruel and nihilistic, but the people liked it. They liked it because even though they knew he was basically joking, in a way he wasn't joking. Because underneath the joke there is a truth that's being expressed. A joke only lands if it says something honest. A joke is never just a joke. And this is something people sort of realized when it came to Donald Trump. Like, you know, he memed his way into the presidency. It's true. A lot of people would say, no, it's not true. It's exaggerated. No, I think he actually gestured his way to the presidency. I think he won because he was a jester. And again, I didn't fully describe it, but the point is that you're a jester because you don't take yourself seriously, you're a clown, but the people take you seriously. You're honestly bullshitting. You're joking, you're jesting, but you mean it. Just like the court jester meant it when he was fucking with the king. And he would tell the king, isn't the king a fat piece of shit? But, you know, he meant it. Like one story of a jester is when, you know, they had like, you know, the kingdom was at war. And they were waging a war on sea. It was a sea battle, and then a bunch of their own people had sunk, you know. And so one of the jokes the jester made was, our people love swimming, you know. Or some, anybody else said that, he would have been executed. But the jester got away with it. So the Jester, as a political strategy, is like George Carlin or Donald Trump. Although he's kind of joking, he's not really joking, but the point is that he never takes himself seriously, but the people take him seriously. The people take George Carlin seriously. And that's how the Jester can win. That's how the Jester can propagate his idea, because the people believe it. But I also said that the Jester is not a leader. Like a Jester doesn't make anything. So Donald Trump, I'm not sure if he's still a Jester because he did build. But you know what I mean? Like, he's still a destructive force. He's a cancer on society. He's a destructive force. But I think there's some magic to that. There's something interesting going on. To expose the system's dishonesty, to really identify with the grossness of the system and really play into that. There's a real power to that. You know what I mean? And so the Jester is not a leader. He doesn't become the king. That's the point. If Jester was the king, he wouldn't be the Jester. So Donald Trump, for me, the reason why he might still be he was definitely a Jester back then. Now it's more shaky because he's the president. But you could still conceive of him as a kind of Jester because he's still destructing society. Right, so this is not necessarily a nice thing. The Jester is not necessarily an ethical thing or a nice thing, something that you smile at. It's a destructive political force. It's a guerrilla strategy. It's a spy strategy. So George Carlin appeared on HBO. So that's the point I was going to make. How is it possible to be so dark and so open and so political and still be so popular? Well, because he's a Jester. So George Carlin turned a lot of people away from loving their country and loving the system and being hardworking, religious people and Christians. He basically told them, no. There's no point being a Christian, no point being a capitalist slave. It's all bullshit. Those in power lied to you. And so it turned a lot of people cynical and maybe even nihilistic. But it's an opportunity for a kind of revolution. At its best, the Jester strategy is an opportunity for a kind of revolution. It can also be a bad revolution, a fascist revolution, like the kind that Donald Trump is building, or because of him is being built. But it can also be a leftist revolution. Like George Carlin was heavily left-leaning. So although he was not building a revolution, there is a kind of background revolution that's being built by people who watch George Carlin by the millions and agree with him. And, they wake up from their slumber and they realize that, God, religion is a lie. Society is full of shit. And so maybe they turn to Marxism and they realize, there is a lot of, there's a surplus value, there is a lot of alienation, there is, So it's a kind of revolution builder. It could build, but it builds by destroying. It is not itself construction, the Jester. The Jester is destruction, but it can give way to construction. But it's not going to be the Jester who builds. It's going to be something else. So that's why I'm hesitating to call Donald Trump a Jester anymore. But I'm just saying he was definitely a Jester before. He was a destructive force that built new fascism. So that's basically the Jester. I hope I got everything. I could probably speak more about it, but then it will make the video real long. Now, two more concepts I wanted to explain. One is the Dark Enlightenment. Now, the Dark Enlightenment used to refer to this idea made up by Nick Land, and I think it was also Moldbug. These are far-right figures who don't like democracy, and they want to build an authoritarian dictatorship, a kind of monarchy instead. Now, I took that idea and I turned it into something else. what did I turn it into? I turned it into the idea that slowly, gratuitously, people are becoming more and more intelligent. People are becoming more and more empathetic. And so, because of that, but it doesn't come free. There's a heavy price attached to enlightenment. Depression, anxiety. Okay? So, I don't think that it's an accident that so many young people today are depressed and anxious, which is a fact. You can look this up. There's everybody knows that it's increasing depression and anxiety across the youth. Over 1 billion people, according to the UN, suffers from mental illness today, which is definitely real, like a real rise. It's not just, oh, the diagnostics have become better. No, people really are more depressed. And I think that one reason for that is because people are more empathetic, more thoughtful. Less than like religion has declined. And that makes a lot of people depressed. There is no God, there is no fundamental purpose. You realize that we're just animals. You look at climate change, oh, we're kind of doomed. You look at the inequalities of capitalism, right? More and more people are turning to the left or the right. And so people are kind of depressed and anxious. But that is not unconnected to being more enlightened. Being depressed and anxious is not just accidental to being more thoughtful and more rational. Like one example for this is the genocide in Gaza, which is now, I think, recognized as an actual genocide. Pretty obvious. There was intent to destroy. Many people have been murdered. About half of them are children. I don't think that 50 years ago people would have given a shit. But today, because we see it on YouTube, we see it on other websites, and there's a kind of pressure to care about it, we become more and more anxious and depressed about it. It's not like this makes us happy. Oh, there's a genocide, woohoo. No, there has to be a causal relationship. And I can't prove this to you right now. I can't give you a scientific fact to say, okay, people are more thoughtful, therefore they're more depressed. But I just think you just kind of have to deduce it and kind of understand that, yeah, it doesn't come free. It's at the very least, there's a high correlation. And another piece of evidence is the rise of antinatalism. Antinatalism, when I came into it about 6 years ago, was a fringe philosophy. Almost nobody knew about it. 6 years later, giant subreddits for antinatalism, people debate it, everybody knows what it means. This happened very quickly. Now, that's not an accident either. You don't just become an antinatalist because everything is going splendidly. People are becoming antinatalists because they're more depressed and more anxious. And all of that feeds into a more enlightened position. Like, I don't want my child to suffer. I can't afford my child. It's not like in the old days where you just shit out 8 kids, even if you knew that you couldn't raise them. People don't do that anymore in the modern world. The more educated people are, the fewer children they have. That's a fact. And I don't think that's accidental. There's a huge connection between being intelligent and being cynical, depressed, anxious, depressed, and depression and intelligence itself is against life. Depression itself is life negating. So the dumber animals have many children, lots of offspring. Like fish, they have thousands of little babies, right, running around, little hatchlings. And bugs, I don't know how many, they probably have like thousands of offspring. But you go up the intelligence ladder, You go to the mammals, fewer children. Then you go to humans, and then you go to educated humans, they have like 1. And I think the pinnacle of that is something like antinatalism. You do have to be intelligent to be an antinatalist. Even if you disagree with it, it's a philosophical position. You have to argue about it, you have to think about it. Dumb people don't become antinatal. You don't have a fucking moron, I'm sorry, but a moron with 86 IQ who's like, yes, I believe that the asymmetry argument for antinatalism is effectual. You know, there has to be a higher IQ, more intelligence, more thoughtfulness. I'm not an IQ, it's just a word, okay? More intelligence. So it's pretty obvious to me that even if I can prove it to you perfectly, there is a connection between depression, anxiety on the one hand, and intelligence and the negation of life on the other. Or intelligence, there's a connection between depression, anxiety, intelligence, and then there's a further connection between intelligence and the negation of life. There's a sense in which higher intelligence is opposed to procreation because of what I just mentioned. Because our selected species have many offspring and case-selected species have few offspring. And human beings are at the top of that case-selected hierarchy. And intelligent humans are even more. Intelligent humans are at the top. People with bachelor's degrees and you know, master's degrees and PhDs and people like me, frankly. I don't have a degree, but it's pretty obvious I'm not a moron. And I don't think that's accidental to the fact that I'm a pessimistic, atheistic antinatalist. Even if you disagree with me. There is, you know, I mean, social science is difficult to prove causation. That's why I'm kind of hesitating. But that's only because social science has its limits. So social science kind of sucks because it has a hard time proving causation. Like, you're not allowed to admit, for example, that being poor causes crime, you know, and because it's really difficult to prove causation. But we all basically know it's true. You know that if you drop someone down in a shitty environment, they're gonna rob people, and if you drop them down in a nice environment, they won't rob people because they have no reason to. Because they already have everything they need. Because they're in school all day instead of running around on the streets. So it's kind of obvious. But social science has a hard time establishing causation. That's why I'm not a big fan of empirical science. I go up to philosophy and I say, yes, we can't deduce it. We can't say that there's a causal relationship between intelligence and the lack of life. Intelligence and depression. I don't think stupid people are really depressed. Be honest, mentally disabled people are not fucking depressed. Not usually. People that die of suicide say, come on, they don't have 80 IQ. Okay, these are people who probably graduated high school. There is just a fundamental connection, a causal relationship. If you understand how dark and unjust and depressing the world is, again, just if you don't know what I'm talking about, just listen to George Carlin. Once you understand that, what he just said, like there's a great video called like a revolutionary mix of George Carlin. Listen to that. Come back here and then you'll understand. Once you understand just how dark and depressing the world is, no God, procreation is not even justifiable because of all the suffering and the injustice, leftist politics, you know, there's people are exploited, you know, it's an unequal society filled with colonialism and slavery. You learn a little bit about the world around you and then you'll be really depressed because it sucks. Because the more you learn about the world, the worse it gets. Like, for example, to give you a fact, there are more slaves in the world today than ever before. Now, that's just a fact. It's true. There are more slaves in the world than ever before. Now, good luck sleeping with that. It's like, you know, if you have empathy, you're not going to like it. But you develop empathy because you see people suffering on YouTube, right? I think the fact that the internet has connected us, we see that people of other races and ethnicities are also human. You know, we watch K-dramas, you know, we watch Squid Game, and we watch Parasite, and we watch fucking Chinese movies or whatever, and we watch Palestinians talk and listen to them and see them suffer, and we say, oh, these are just humans. No reason to be a fucking racist piece of shit. So, again, the more you understand about the world, be it on a leftist basis, an antinatalist basis, or why not even a right-wing basis, like some of the right-wing is right about some of the stuff. I'm not a total sucker for the left. They have some dark insights that are probably true. Like the emancipation of women obviously leads to the unemancipation of men, because now the women can fuck whoever they like, and a lot of the men are not gonna get a chance because they're too ugly, or they're too mentally fucked, or they're too short. So now they're fucked more and more. But back in the day, they could have easily had a wife, right? So, or, you know, because of the emancipation of women, they don't have to have children. Nothing is binding them to have children. That causes a fertility crisis, that causes a mass immigration. Mass immigration causes conflict. So, you know, that's actually good for them because it plays into populism and fascism. But the point is that even on the right, even, you know, young men who are leaning right, they can still discover some of these dark facts about the world. Like that we're just animals, like if they're incels. If they take the black pill. Yeah, there's some truth to that we're just animals. And it's not pretty. And it's not pretty, the halo effect, that people like you better because you're more attractive. It's obviously true. And, you know, so of course you become depressed and anxious because the world sucks, and you understand that. And so when I'm talking about the Dark Enlightenment, I'm talking about the fact that the Enlightenment, the fact that we're more intelligent, more thoughtful, or even richer than we used to be, living in rich, developed nations, it doesn't come for free. There's a price that you have to pay. And much of that price is cashed out in depression, in anxiety, in burnout. So if you read Mark Fisher, Capitalist Realism, you read Byung-Chul Han, Burnout Society, great explications of what's happening here. But everybody knows this, that this modern society that we're living in, yes, it was bought at the price of intelligence, technology, modern technology, capitalist production. You need a lot of intelligence to figure this shit out. Compound interest. Yeah, look at the equation for compound interest. It takes brains to figure this out. But once you figure all this shit out, there's a price that you have to pay. This technology and this increased intelligence, this sophistication that we can, you know, program in Python, and we can, we can have infinite amounts of money, pretty much, and we can make robots with, you know, Boolean logic and blah, blah, blah. That intelligence doesn't come for free. There's a price you have to pay. People are fatter than they used to be. They're on Ozempic now. They have type 2 diabetes. They're depressed. They're suicidal. Because nothing comes for free. If you have more technology and more intelligence, then the evil people figure out ways to exploit you even bigger than they did before. So you have to work, you know, like 14 hours just to make a living. Whereas if you lived in a small village somewhere, and you had a farm and you hunted, maybe you would have to work 4 hours. But the evil leaders of society figured out a way to really fuck you up. They're not just going to give you all this technology for free. You have to take it from them. That's why you need a revolution. That's why capitalism is not sustainable, first of all, because I think people want to take the technology for themselves, take it away from the pigs who exploit them. But also they shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to not enjoy, the fruits of their own labor. They shouldn't have to work 14 hours a day just to pay $2,400 for a condo, just so they can go back to work tomorrow. So, you know, the point is that that increased awareness of what I just explained, of having class consciousness, for example, that comes out of higher learning. But that also causes conflict, because now the poor people, you know, the proletariat want to rise up against the rich. And there's going to be conflict. And the conflict is going to hurt people. And you know, it's going to be painful. And you know, so the point that I'm making is that an increased intelligence, increased intelligence doesn't come for free. The enlightenment is not just an optimistic, simple-minded enlightenment. It's an enlightenment that has suffering in it, has obesity in it, has depression in it, has class conflict in it. The enlightenment is not free. That's the more appropriate use of the term Dark Enlightenment. Okay, that's pretty rambly, but I don't, you know, I'm off the cuff here. One more thing and then we'll finish. This one has to do with what I call Autisticene. So just like you have Anthropocene, which is the age of humanity, so I think there's an autistic age that we're living through. This insight came to me when I realized that society doesn't really like autistics. Society shuns autistics. They don't like socially awkward autistics who can't hold eye contact or who can't hold down a conversation, you know. We all know that ableism is a thing. We all know that autistic people have it rough in society. They have, I looked at the statistics. They have really bad numbers. Me included. They have high rates of depression. Over the course of a lifetime, the incidence of depression is like 50 to 80% or something. They have problems, all kinds of fucking gastrointestinal problems. I'm sure they're less likely to get laid. All these issues. But I also noticed that society itself is deeply autistic. 9 to 5, money, banking industry, all kinds of, like it's really neatly scheduled, right? Everything is really neatly scheduled. Society is quite the autist, because, you know, when an artist doesn't get his way, when his schedule is broken, he's bound to have like a mental breakdown, and spurg out, if you will. Meltdown, autistic meltdown. I have them all the time. But when you think about it, society also has a meltdown. When you don't do what society says, it has a fucking meltdown. It doesn't give you money. It chucks you in prison. It shuns you. It creates social isolation, right? You don't have a job? Shunned. You have a bad job? Shunned. You stole animal crackers? Shunned. You're too short? Not a good conversationist? Shunned. So society has all these. Society is very autistic in the sense that it's very strict. It has a strict schedule and strict rules that you have to abide by. That's exactly like an autistic. The autistic likes to have consistency, and when he doesn't get his consistency, the same route, the same schedule every day, he gets what is called an autistic meltdown. And I realized that society is very similar to that. And so society is becoming more autistic because society has a tough time now regulating everything. A lot of people are now hopeless. A lot of people are becoming neat or hikikomori. They're refusing to work. They don't have children. They're depressed. They're anxious. So there's a sense in which society seems to be breaking down. Okay. There's just a lot of reasons why society is breaking down. I'm not a right-winger, but I think immigration is a part of it because, it creates a kind of cultural clash. It might actually make a revolution more difficult because immigrant workers are more likely to put up with bad conditions. I think that might be a real problem. But the point, okay, people are atheists, they don't believe in God like me. They're becoming antinatalist. They're becoming depressed, anxious. They're refusing to fuck, right? So, if people are not abiding by society's rules and demands, society will have an autistic meltdown. And when I say society, I just mean society, like what's happening. I think that's why you have school shootings. That's why you have depression. That's why you have suicide. That's why you have fertility crisis. That's why you have a rise of fascism, you know, or even the rise of leftism. You have these things which are bad for society because society wants to maintain its power. It doesn't want to lose its power. You know, you know, so it has these meltdowns which come out in the form of, you know, violence and depression and so forth. So I think Donald Trump, for example, is part of the meltdown. The assassination of Charlie Kirk is part of the meltdown. School shootings are part of the meltdown. You know, the opioid crisis in the US is part of the meltdown. The mass migration is part of the meltdown. Antinatalism, part of the meltdown. The far right, the far left. It's all part of the meltdown. Society is just not functioning properly anymore. There's a pretty obvious sense in which society is kind of disintegrating. You know, it's no longer the case that, okay, you go to college, you get a job, you get married, you have 2 kids, you die. That's not nothing like it anymore. And so the order of society is being kind of broken up and shattered. And society does not like that, so it has these meltdowns. And, you know, this is very depressing and scary, I know, but that's the truth. We are living through a bizarre, dangerous situation that I can't fully understand myself. But the point is that there's a kind of meltdown happening. And so society is autistic. And so, you know, autism is a spectrum. So society might have been autistic before, but it was kind of high-functioning autism. Society could more or less function back in the day. People knew their place, right? Almost everybody was basically on the same page. They're Christian, okay, they're American, or they're European, whatever. But nowadays, like I said, people are moving in 1,000 different directions, and they're becoming cynical, and they're becoming nihilistic, and they're becoming depressed, and they're becoming unhappy. And so I think society in a way has become low functioning autistic. Society is just not functioning as nicely as it used to. So the old criticism of society, you know, this bourgeois system that gives you security, that criticism no longer really applies. Because now you don't have security. You have precarity. You don't really know what's going to happen anymore. You don't know if you're going to make a living. You don't know you don't know if climate change is going to wipe us out. War. There didn't used to be things like that most of the time before. Mostly it was fairly obvious what was going to happen. Locked in. Now, at least you knew you were going to heaven, right? Your kids are going to grow up, I'm going to die and go to heaven. And that was a nice picture of reality, but it's gone. All that security that you used to have, gone. And so the question is that good or bad? Well, that's probably too deep for this video, but I tend to be a jester, right? So remember, going back to the jester, that for the jester, chaos is a good thing. So this might sound kind of cringe, But you know, the end of Jester, of Joker 1 with Joaquin Phoenix is actually what I meant by the Jester. That kind of chaos is fertile ground for a Jester to come out and bring up, you know, bring out the new world. But it's really hard to see what that new world is going to look like, given that people don't really want to participate in it. It might just be a slow burnout, you know? So that's kind of depressing. But that's the point of the Dark Enlightenment, right? So you see how these three concepts are connected to each other, right? The world is undergoing sort of a Dark Enlightenment, where we're becoming more thoughtful, more careful. But this comes with a price, comes with darkness, comes with depression, comes with burnout, comes with a lack of faith, a lack of hope, all that shit. A lack of even consistency, a lack of a normal life. So society is now telling us, well, you're smart enough, you're a big boy now. You're smart enough to take care of your own finances. You don't need us. You can have your own 401k, you can have your own job, you can have your own investments. You don't need us. Women, you don't have to, women, you don't need to stay in the kitchen. You can go out and do your own thing. But again, this comes with problems. It comes with problems between men and women. Comes with a low fertility, which will blah, 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 blah. Immigrants, you know, possibly a civil war because of it. Or at least civil tensions. A lack of faith, right? It was, you know, people, it was stupid and it was fake. But at least people had somewhere to go. If they're atheists, they just think, oh, fuck that. Okay, so growing up and being a big boy, I'm just saying, is not easy. The progress that we have undoubtedly made is not all good. It's very substantially bad. I don't think there's a sense in which the world is better. I think we still have genocides, we still have slavery, people are still depressed. 1 billion people today are mentally ill. I'm not optimistic about the future of the world. I'm not optimistic about solving climate change. Doesn't look like we're doing that. In fact, it looks like we're not doing that. Not really optimistic about immigration either. I don't think people are gonna like each other very much. I think immigration might have the result that people no longer recognize their own country as theirs, so they won't really have any reason to really contribute other than selfish, you know, like self-interest, just make some money. And that could work, but then again, it's really easy to exploit cynical people. People who have no hope. That's fertile ground for a Jester, but it's also fertile ground for an evil Jester, or for populism, or for fascism, and that's exactly what happened with Trump. So I'm just saying, I am, broadly speaking, very progressive, but I'm not delusionally progressive. I don't just think, okay, well, you know, all this nice progress with gay rights and women's rights and freedom, and, you know, it has a lot of bad things. You know, there's a larger tendency that creates this progress. That's what I call the Dark Enlightenment. That's what I call the Autisticene, right? Where society has these meltdowns, and even individually people are more autistic, right? That point has been made. It's kind of the more obvious point to make about the Autisticene, is that individuals are more autistic now than they used to be. And it's not because of food dye or whatever, it's because, you know, when you're in your room all the time and you only speak to people online, you tend to lose your social skills. So I think much of the problems that come out of autism, like not looking people in the eye, selective mutism, pacing back and forth, stimming, these are basically not necessarily autistic traits. They're traits that autistics suffer because society mistreats them, treats them badly. They're just coping mechanisms, and we undoubtedly have had more of these. Individuals are more autistic, are less socially capable, more likely to not look people in the eye, probably, more likely to be mute, more likely to not talk to people, more likely to use their social skills, maybe more likely to stim, I don't know, maybe. Because the world is getting more autistic, more individualistic, more individualistic in a bad way, individualistic in an isolationist kind of way, where you're on your own, you're just you and the market, and you make money, and everything is really rationalistic, and that's very autistic, right? Autistics, that's why I connected to autism. When you know, the machine works smoothly and everything is just about computations and numbers and efficiency, and we just focus on our health because we're unhealthy, right? Ooh, I gotta get my calories in, I gotta get my steps in. We're not really living anymore for a larger purpose. We're just living to keep ourselves alive as machines. So more and more our lives are just about self-maintenance in an isolating way. That is what is autistic. That is part of the Autisticene. Okay, so probably shouldn't talk too much because it's already too long and people don't really watch this stuff. So if you're still listening to this, yeah, I don't know how to make you happy. Like, it's probably very dark and depressive what I said. But I don't know how to make up for that. I don't know. I could be wrong about everything I just said, but I don't think I am. So the situation is kind of bleak. I frankly don't see any hope for humanity. I'm a Carlinian. I agree with George Carlin. I believe that humanity is almost certainly doomed. Humanity has too many dark feedback loops, too many, even the fact that language exists is a problem because it separates us. It creates conflict, creates misunderstanding. All the big machines that we used to kill each other with. Climate change, right? It's obviously because of technology. There are just too many ways in which society is doomed. What I said about intelligence, right? That as society becomes more intelligent with more educated people, they just don't want to have kids. They just don't have children because of it. So humanity is doomed, probably. But that, see, you can be doomed in a better way. So if we just sort of slowly die out, that might be the best option. But I don't really foresee some kind of beautiful future. And again, I could be wrong. I don't know. Maybe that could be a beautiful future. I just don't see how. Because there's a difference between individual enlightenment and collective enlightenment. That's one thing I haven't mentioned is the Dark Enlightenment is really about individuals. People are getting more thoughtful. But is humanity getting more thoughtful? Doesn't really look like it. But that's because there's a structural difference. A structural difference between individuals and the structure. So the task is to somehow unite the individual decency with the structural decency. Well, that's really hard to do. Because the world is basically run by pedophiles and sociopaths. There are strong nationalist interests, capitalist interests. It's really difficult to connect the individual decency that a lot of people have against the structural indecency. The countries, the political blocks, the wars, the genocides, the capitalism. Really difficult to somehow destroy all that for a better future. Not impossible, but I'm not optimistic. I think, like I said, humanity is on too many negative feedback loops. And there's not much point going forward if you know that the world basically sucks and you're just an animal and there's no God and there's no hope, and, you know, just too many reasons not to work out. So let's say, can I say something optimistic? Well, I mean, you know, you can enjoy yourself in the meantime. You don't have to suffer too much. You can accomplish something alone, yourself. Or you can work with other people. It doesn't mean you have to be optimistically delusional. The best you can do is your best, that's it. That's why the Japanese say ganbatte, you know. So, don't be too depressed because of me. Maybe take these arguments and take them forward or whatever. Maybe that will give you something to do. But I probably shouldn't be talking too much because I'm just wasting your time. So, Jane.